content for degenerates and
Man, I don't even think the money's in not safe for work. I think the money's in like legitimate stuff once you're actually like good enough. But like if you're an amateur, you can actually make pretty decent money on not safe for work. Yeah. But, like you make like thousands of dollars a commission on if you're good enough to make it for companies or like streamers
that's like
and stuff.
1% of people are in like or less, probably in that industry, probably less than 1% of people are like making that kind of money.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like big money in that industry, like there is just such a retarded amount of money in the like mobile games market, especially.
Oh, true. Yeah, just doing like the marketing as social, like the general marketing, like packages for people too. If you charge a flat rate across your career, you eventually get so much faster, right? That you're doing work that amateurs would do for, say charge $50 an hour and it takes you 2 hours, so it costs you $100. By the end, you're doing it in like 8 minutes. You're mocking up shit, and like you can just send off a $200 bill after like 20 minutes total work. I don't know.
Yeah, that's like definitely something.
I just think all those industries are just like a shit show because the barrier to entry is so low.
Yeah. It's like coding and whatnot.
This might have to be a hot take, but like being an artist, people are like, oh, art's so important, but like not that important. Like I don't see an artist drawing up a vaccine for me. There's a reason why you don't get paid anything as an artist unless you're good.
Oh, but I mean, like it's important for.
Oh, it's important.
Mobile game companies, like a lot of them, basically make or break. People won't download your game if you don't have good art on your.
Yeah, if you don't have the nice, engaging little picture icon.
Very true. But I'm just saying that like the starving artist deserves to starve for a while, so he scares him into getting good.
You'd be an excellent boss.
Well, I mean,
all right, we are live, guys.
All right,
been live for a bit. So, welcome to Troglodyte Radio's Hot Takes. We're just gonna give our thoughts on random crap and see how it goes.
Some hot takes.
Yeah. So I'll kick it off.
All right.
My hot take is having a friend of a different race is actually a pretty good defense against being the charge of racism. Essentially, there's that trope that says, well, I have a black friend, or I have my best friend is black, and it's seen as taboo to say something like that if somebody calls you a racist. And my point is, actually, if you legitimately have a black friend, like a good friend who is of a different race, that's actually a solid defense against racism. One of the main reasons I think this is true is there's that guy, Dale Davis. I saw him on Rogan a number of years back, and he got 200 KKK members to hang up the robes, and he was just doing it through befriending them. Like, these KKK members, like full-blown KKK members, couldn't handle knowing just one dude and being friends with one black guy. They just quit. It's like, man, just having a black friend literally got them to quit the KKK. So I actually think it's a pretty solid. If you actually have a good black friend or a friend of a different race of any type, I think it actually is a solid defense. But if you're just saying, if you're pretending like you have a friend of a different race, that's like, you're just lying to get out of it. But I think the actual friendship is really important and is like it belies your actual intentions and your actual beliefs. Rather, like you've engaged in building and nurturing a friendship with somebody who's a different race than you. It's like you're not going to do that if you're an hardened racist.
I think the only thing I'd say to that is like they better back you up.
Yeah, they're just run away from you. Like, I don't know this guy.
Yeah, no, he is my friend.
Yeah, that would be a shitty spot.
Well, I think the main potential criticism with that, and like you hate to see it, but like racism just means a ton of things these days that aren't very serious.
Well, yeah, it's true. It's like
so people using it in that sort of not serious way, then it's not quite like they're calling you a KKK member racist. They're saying like
you are mildly bigoted in
you
some way.
avert your gaze when you see a dominant-looking black male or something. Like, just things like that can be what people talk about with racism these days, which probably isn't great to muddy the word like that.
I think the point was to muddy the word like that. I honestly do think that was kind of the point with a lot of this stuff, but
maybe we need a word that's like super racist. Like, you're a super racist. Like, only a super racist would, join the KKK, but you can be a regular racist. I think that's an interesting hot take. I do think that Price is right in saying that people would be able to throw racism at you without the charge of, like, of course you can have a friend who's black, but you're probably racist against another group, or you're sexist or whatever, and they instantly switch into some sort of other attack against you if you are so unfortunate to be labeled a racist in today's age.
Well, so unfortunate meaning pretty much if you have opinions that are not completely towing a line.
True.
Depending on what group you're with.
Like, I think the charge often in the time, though, the charge of racism is often like, it is like, oh, you're like an alt-right
neo-Nazi
type, like, white supremacist. Like, that's often like the
that's the implication of the charge of racism.
And that's like the jump too. Is like, you're like, how often is the word white supremacist bandied about by wokies all the time? Like, it's just that's like probably their most popular kind of phrase or charge, right? Is you're right, white supremacist. And I think the hot take does, I think that's true. Like, it's not a full clear, but it's a clear of that level of racism. It's like if you're a full-blown white supremacist, like, either have to ship out or murder all minorities. Like, why would you be friends with them? Like, it just makes no sense. Like, it's just not congruent to have other race friends and be a white supremacist. It just makes no sense.
That's why I brought up Dale Davis. Those KKK members that he got to quit, the reason they quit is because they wound up hanging out with a person. They didn't know any black people, and therefore it was just easy to lump all of them into this category of bad criminal that you should get rid of or not ever talk to. Like, they're not people you should ever associate with. And then once they're actually exposed to one, like just a random black person, and they hang out with them for a bit, they start to become friends with the guy, and they're like, well, like they can't hold those two different thoughts in their head, and it just broke them, and they quit. And I think,
well, to push back on that a little bit, though, like, you could have like the thinking of, oh, he's one of the good ones, right?
Yeah. So that was going to be my other point, is there's always that term that people use, right? But what I think is rather interesting is that's not really what happened with these guys. They didn't just, they didn't keep the robes on and say, yeah, he's just one of the good ones. I think that if you build a really deep, genuine friendship with somebody across the racial barrier, that barrier just dissolves, I think, a lot more than you would have seen otherwise, right? But
I think it's a strong defense, but it's not like a full discharge.
It's not like it's
bigotry or whatever.
Yeah, it's not a trump card or anything like that.
Yeah, bigotry is like a much better word to describe like the low-key racism stuff.
Yeah, so it doesn't. I do think it's a strong, because like you said, they almost all of them did, I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming like all the ones he actually connected with like quit something like the KKK, which is an extremely like strong form of racism and white supremacy, right? But they still might have bigoted views, and they still might be stereotype people, or but I mean, that's a huge step in the right direction, right?
Exactly.
Like
it's like you said before, it's a good defense. It helps clear the charge of true white supremacy, because it really isn't.
I think you can use it any way around, right? Like, if if you're Asian and you have a black friend, or if you're Asian and have a white friend, or whatever, whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what race.
it is a good, it's a good indication that someone is, certainly like to a certain level, like accepting or
open-minded,
and doesn't hold any like extreme prejudice for race, right? Like it would be almost inconceivable to find someone who has a true genuine friendship with another race and then is actually just hates all other races, like on a deep level. Like it just wouldn't really, those are essentially mutually exclusive.
Yeah, the reason I thought
about itself would be a strong indicator of mental illness.
Yeah.
Well, multiple personality.
Well, that was one of the impetus for this is I saw people accusing others who were married to somebody of a different race of white supremacy and just like general racism, and they're like, even if you are married to somebody of a different race, like you can still be extremely racist and a white supremacist. And I thought that's a extraordinary thought. What's that?
You'd have to work really hard to be married to a black woman and be a white supremacist. It would be like Batman. You need like a cave of racism.
No, clearly they're just trying to get in on the reparations early.
Yeah.
they're just plotting ahead. They're like, oh
it's
yeah,
like
the payday's coming, boys.
Yeah, it's like Switzerland. They're just like, well, I don't know who's going to win this next election, but I certainly want to be able to say that I'm in both groups.
Hedging their bets for their kids. I think that's a fair hot take. Like there's truth there, and very unpopular, I'd say.
That definitely is something that I noticed. People get very uncomfortable if.
Well, they just mock it outright.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's seen as like an actual dog whistle to say something like that, right?
The last thing I'll say on that, is definitely because you see a lot of, I would say, people who are probably racist use it as a defense because it's easy to say, but
they don't actually have any they don't have any friends who are of different races, right? Like they're actually, I think the one real problem with it is when people, they say, oh, but one of my best friends is black, and they actually have no friends of a different race at all, right? Like they're just lying. But I think so you'd actually have to separate out those groups because there are going to be shitty people who do that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for me on this one. If you guys got anything else, we can move on to Hubbard's.
I think that's all right. So I'll take my first one, and mine's basically that like the conservative or traditionalist doomsayer, they're like right way more often than we'd like to admit. So what I mean by that is like, you'll have some, conservative, I mean in the traditional sense of the word, like someone who doesn't like change or is against change, wants to maintain tradition and that kind of thing. Some progressive agenda will come along and they'll say, no, don't do that. Like it's going to fuck everything up. Like, just hold off. Like that's not smart. And everyone, especially in this day and age, because I think we've had like a long streak of like progressive policy by and large paying off, kind of just laughs them off. Like, how could you be such like an ignorant moron that you'd, actually think that progressive policy is going to fail, and progressive policy is could be anything but the saving grace of humanity. And that's, it's not slippery slope. There's no such thing as slippery slope, blah blah blah. And then some change comes along, and the ones that are complete disaster, we kind of just sweep under the rug and pretend like, oh yeah, we're advancing along. And like one obvious kind of one that comes to mind is eugenics. Like that was like the cutting edge of the progressive agenda for like decades in the early 1900s. Like that was like all the lefties were like, oh, eugenics, here we come. Oh baby, like this is going to solve all of humanity's problems. And then, we saw how that played out in, Nazi Germany particularly, but also in the US. They had like, the US was like jumped on eugenics the fastest out of pretty much any country. And that was, wound up horrible horrible consequences in both cases. Yet people are never willing to talk about those, because then it like kind of it undermines like the progressive agenda by like more broadly. So people just use the heuristic like change is good, and if you disagree with it, you're just a kind of a bigoted, backwards dumbass, and don't worry about it.
Another example, I think, of a progressive policy from back in the day that people don't realize was progressive and still condemn, but not as realizing as progressive, was the residential schools in Canada.
Yeah, that I think that's another good case where at that time, like that was seen as like the way to get Indigenous Canadians like caught up with their European peers, like just train them how to teach them the skills that Europeans have, and they'll have the same outcomes as Europeans. And that was like the intention, right? Was like they're not doing as well as Europeans on all these metrics, and you can make a parallel to today, right? Like with groups not doing as well, like just tell them to do things the same way we do it and it'll work out. And yeah, I think that's a great example of how it didn't work.
Yeah, because residential schools would have been the cutting edge progressive idea of the time, right? Like what was done before is you just run them over like they did in the States, right? You just go to war with them. That's the old school way of doing it. Residential schools would have been seen as like a way more benevolent and forward-thinking mode of interacting with the Indigenous population.
I suppose the argument against this hot take would be like, you're never going to make progress unless you try.
Unless you crack a few eggs, eh?
Yeah, and if you eventually, like, I'm not saying that eugenics is positive. I'm saying that we should celebrate the victories of progressivity, but we need to, like everything, learn the past in order to not repeat it. But like, you could be pretty stuck in the mud socially and economically if you were purely conservative. So like so many things in life, my thing would be, compromise is important on all things. But
well, I don't disagree. I guess my take on that is like we don't do that, right? Like people basically go, especially in the modern era, since there has, like, in hindsight, right, you can point to more, I would say, wins by progressives than losses, right? So they default to the heuristic, like change is good. Opposing change is, an indication of your backwardness and your stupidity and your hatefulness, and that's the only like motivation that you could possibly have, is you're just stuck in the past, gripping onto the power that you're going to lose with the change, right? And I think like that's totally untrue. Like there's things, like say eugenics, I think we look back on it as like kind of across the board not a good idea, but I think there's like current things in our society that have changed that have mixed results, and we're not willing to even admit those mixed results. We're just we just pretend that they're an unfettered good, like that we changed that and that's just for the better and good I'll make an example of like no fault divorce. Like no fault divorce did allow people to get out of a situation that was not good for them. It did allow some people to a way out, but it also caused just the cost of getting divorced to go way down, which led to a lot more divorces, which led to family breakup, which led to all sorts of poor outcomes for children. So, but people, I highly doubt you'd get people willing to admit that trade-off and willing to admit, well, that was a progressive policy that got pushed in that had mixed consequences. I would almost guarantee you that your 99% of your progressives are just going to stay by the line that, no, that's just it's a straight good benefit to everyone, and if you don't agree, fuck you, like you're wrong.
Yeah, the consequence of family breakup is due to something else, even though it's been tied pretty clearly to that. That's the argument I saw, around family breakup and marriage. A lot of people just head in the sand about it. I think that's a good hot take. I really think that the society doesn't value, like they really don't value what the conservative ethos is about, right? It's about moving carefully and conserving things from the past that have worked, because these things in the past have usually worked for thousands of years. So before you just go chopping that tree down to build something new, you better think very carefully about what you're doing. And you definitely don't want to be conserving everything and sticking to the past in every sort of way. Like, obviously that's how you do get stuck in an absolute quagmire, but I think there has to be a lot more attention given over to the fact that I like Thomas Sowell's. It's like Thomas Sowell's saying, "There's no such thing as solutions. There are only trade-offs." I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of a hard time poking hole. I think it's important to poke holes in people's hot takes because they're hot takes for a reason. But I feel like essentially the hot take breaks down to in my mind, you can't be so progressive and say oh man, the future is going to be so much better if only we change this, and then ignore all of the people who were hurt by that change or the unintended consequences of the change that weren't factored in or whatever. But applying this thinking to all sorts of things all of a sudden, just as you've brought it up, has been sort of interesting for me. But
and to make it a little bit spicier, I think it applies to things that a lot of progressives would hold as close to their heart, like gay marriage. I think you'd find it almost impossible to find a progressive that would say that gay marriage had any possible negative consequences. Whereas I think if you actually took some time to analyze it, you could come up with there is I think a legitimate argument that it does kind of undermine the point of marriage in general. And the point of marriage in general is not, two people that love each other. The point of marriage is basically keeping together a mother and father to raise children. That's the point. That's the purpose it serves. It doesn't, and that's historically what it served and what it by and large does. And so when you pretend, I think making marriage not about that all of a sudden kind of just undermines its usefulness for that purpose. Not to say that you shouldn't legalize gay marriage or anything. You should just admit that maybe there's some consequences and some repercussions from doing it that you might have to consider and talk about. But I don't think you'd ever get a progressive to admit that or consider that.
So you're saying a progressive agenda isn't, or the progressive agenda is seen by progressives as a universal good, whereas conservative agenda is seen as some sort of universal bad. And in reality, there's, like everything, there's drawbacks to the progressive agenda and drawbacks to the conservative agenda, which is interesting because you're right. If I said that, hey, there was probably some bad things that came out of legalizing gay marriage, I think a lot of people in my immediate friend group might beat me down, sort of thing.
Exactly, and to add to that, you could make I think a lot of arguments you hear for, say, something like social changes like that is well, that's going to loosen kind of the grip. It's gonna basically undermine tradition and undermine social norms and lead to bad things. And the constant progressive response is, haha, that's what a joke, you're an idiot, that will never happen. And then now, in the modern era, it went from gay marriage to now LGBTQT plus S plus whatever, being on every application process for a job, and people self-identifying who definitely aren't LGBTQ identifying as such just to get stay competitive on the job application. You know what I mean? If that you could very easily see a some crazy pastor from the 1960s saying, next thing you know, they'll have a checkbox to say whether or not you're gay on your job application. And then 1960s progressives they're never gonna do that. That's absurd. You're talking out of your ass. You're fear mongering. And then lo and behold, 2020, that's exactly what we have, right? So
That's true.
I think it's just funny that a lot of those predictions that were seen as over the top and ludicrous and ridiculous, 20 years ago come true.
I think it's a solid hot take. Does anybody else have anything else?
That's a thoughtful one too. I think that's something that I'm gonna mull over after as well, just to.
It's a pretty spicy one.
Yeah, and also
you might get yourself, like you said, beat down over it.
Yeah, and or even applying the last point that Hubbard's made of just being like, oh, they tick a box that you're gay, and what's the wildest, most outlandish result that I can think of from some progressive policy, like UBI being introduced in 2020 or something gangs will become ultra powerful because they'll recruit people's UBI or something, and then we'll see that in the future. I think that'd be an interesting thought exercise.
Nostradamus over here.
Yeah, I'm just. What if we just kill people for their social insurance number and take their UBI?
That'll happen.
You don't need a job. You can just collect people in your basement.
Oh man, actually offer people to pay you all of their UBI to live in virtual reality in your basement, and then you take the profits and you keep them alive on the bare minimum.
You just squeeze.
This is really turned into a dystopian nightmare podcast.
Well, on that note, I think we can.
Yeah.
We can tie that right there before we start making Nostradamus predictions on every possible policy. I think Price, you're up on those on the next one.
Yeah. So mine is a little too broad, so I'm gonna narrow it down partway through. But often you see the economic commentators, especially on the left, talk about how the middle class hasn't had actual wealth, wage growth in about 50 years, I think, something around that. And then they don't take into account any aspect of material well-being other than wage, obviously, because they're focused on that, kind of with the implication that is the most important thing to focus on. And the comeback that I've seen to that is that material wealth has continued to increase because the cost of goods has gone down, so you can buy more with less. But the hot take that I have is that even the people who are talking about material wealth increasing are ignoring a huge wealth increase, potentially exponential. I don't know how you calculate the value of just the intellectual property people have access to through software, which just didn't exist in the past. So a simple example being almost everyone has a phone, even lower class people, that has access to Google Maps or Google or in Wikipedia. And that sort of access you couldn't buy for any amount of money in 1970. And I think that's a huge value added to people's lives that's often ignored when people talk about how things aren't getting much better for people.
So I actually agree with a large part of that. I think that I was just listening to a podcast, actually, one of the Lex Friedman podcasts, and he was talking to an economist, and that was one of his main points, just saying there's been a huge increase in value that's not captured by GDP measure just because it can't be in our current format. And he thinks it's an enormous number because it's stuff like Google Maps, it's all this free stuff that people have access to. The one kind of thing that I would say that's despite it being, I think the main concern there with people saying they're frustrated with the stagnant wages, and then they're frustrated with the stagnant wages, but a lot of people then, or not a lot of people, some people, I actually do hear your argument, Price. Some people have made this argument that I've heard, but it's very uncommon. And but my counter argument to that is, I think for some of the things that actually matter, the wage salary stagnation is a problem. They can't afford homes. I think that's one of the big problems in many cities is people okay, the wages have stayed stagnant, but they haven't gotten access to a reasonable housing market in their cities, and that's really tough on them. So despite gathering this huge amount of extra material wealth that their parents' generation and their grandparents' generation never would have had. They still miss out on like that main capital building, that equity building, and just like general life milestone. So
I think it's kind of like, I'll admit it's kind of dodging the question on that, but my understanding of the housing markets in the same time period as the lack of wage growth is that the increase in price is predominantly driven by the increase in banks being willing to lend out money rather than the actual amount of money people are paying for a house up front. So they go into more debt to buy a house. So if you aren't willing to go into this amount of debt to buy a house, someone else is. So therefore, I think you could say that if you had higher wage growth, you would actually have even higher housing market evaluations because the banks would give out even bigger loans.
Well, I wanted to clarify one thing too. Like when they talk about wage stagnation, they do, as far as I know, they do that in the context of norming it against inflation, right? So that's all considered, right? Like they take a basket of goods from 1970 and compare it to your average wage. You know, how much of a basket of goods can you buy with a 1970 average wage? And then they go to 2020 and they say, taking the same basket of goods, how much does a 2020 wage buy you? And that's where they find like a central equivalence between the two, indicating that your average wage doesn't buy any more in 1970 than it does in 2020, which is why they claim stagnation. I do have a couple of like added points there. One problem that people do point to is like productivity has definitely increased from 1970 to 2020 in terms of if you're just using the same, if you're not using a different productivity measure, so not capturing that immaterial wealth you're talking about, productivity has continued to climb. So that indicates that, they're not, employers aren't passing on as much of a percentage of the wealth as they used to their employees if, productivity continues to climb, but wages don't. And then in terms of like housing, I think, that is essentially, basically it's just tied to interest rate. And that's like, you can think of interest rate, I mean, this is a gross oversimplification, but it is essentially like how much risk does the bank or any lender feel like they're taking on when they lend out money. And if, in an era of whatever our interest rates are right now, negligible, that it just is an assumption that there's very little risk and therefore they should be lending out money, which just obviously is going to inflate asset prices. So that is true.
The one thing with the basket of goods, like definitely true on things like food, to my knowledge, or like things that haven't changed in 50 years. But if you're buying a calculator in 1970 and a calculator today for the same amount of money, you get way more bang for your buck out of that calculator today.
I'm going to push back on that as well. Calculators probably are the same. Big calculator would have you believe that 2020 calculator is worth more, but they're probably equivalent.
I think.
You know what I mean? Like, smartphone couldn't buy for any money then, so like that's not being brought into the.
I know. Well, I think that's where the hot take does have its legitimacy, where there's tons of things we can't measure that are present in 2020 that weren't present in 1970, and they're just not going to work their way into that measurement, right? They can't.
Yeah.
Anecdotally to the smartphone thing, but I was walking through a city park the other day, and I saw a homeless man telling another homeless man that he didn't believe that he didn't have an iPhone. And I was like, that is true. And it's true. You see a lot of like homeless or very, very low income class people, and they absolutely have iPhones, and there is free Wi-Fi almost everywhere in a city. And you have access to essentially unlimited, I don't want to say knowledge, unlimited information, because knowledge requires that you understand it, I guess. But there are these things that are, the barriers have been permanently broken down. And I think that's where I support the hot take. But I think like things like the housing market are more, there's more complication. And I want to speak the littlest about this because I'm the least educated on economic policy and housing. But I believe that there are things like you can still buy a house in places that parents bought houses in previous, but if you want to buy a house in a city, perhaps, or in like one of the hot markets, it's very, very difficult to do that. I think a lot of the conversation only is talked about, urban, dense places, San Francisco, Toronto, Los Angeles, New York. These places are always the center of conversation when it comes to real estate.
But the thing is, they do contain the huge chunks of the population. So
especially in Canada.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like
I understand
it's pretty
that.
valid. Like Vancouver and Toronto, between the two of them, contain like some absurd amount of Canada's population.
A third.
Something.
Almost a third. The Greater Toronto area.
Toronto alone is almost a third.
Yeah,
right?
The Greater Toronto area is 8.4 million. The Greater Vancouver area is 2.4 million.
Well, and just to add to that, like interest rates are a huge driver, but I would say the other driver that for like housing is basically that in 2020 in those cities, you're competing against the global rich for a house as a middle class, person from that country. So if you're a Canadian, you're not competing with, by and large, other Canadians of, similar economic means and education, whatever. Yeah. You're competing against someone with a high-end degree from, Europe or Japan or China or anywhere, India, that are looking to make their home in a country like Canada, because basically as globalism progresses, the best places in the world are going to, like the top 10% from every country are just going to go to the best places to live, which are predominantly going to be Western cities, right? Like if you're born in whatever, like somewhere in say China, and you are smart and hardworking, you're probably going to want to get a top of the line education somewhere. And yes, there are great education institutions in China, but by and large, you're going to probably want to go to a Western institution. And a lot of those people find the quality of life in somewhere like Canada just too hard to pass up, and they stay. And so you're going to be competing against someone with an engineering degree or medical degree from, that was originally from China, and you're competing on whatever middle class salary you have. You're just not going to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. That's.
We're getting on 12 minutes here. So, is there any last quick tips or comments on it?
I think that was a good hot take.
I think it's move on to the next one probably.
Alrighty, Padlock, that's you.
So my first hot take is that working from home sucks, and I think this is a hot take for a huge portion of the population, and for other people, they're gonna 100% be like, duh. Extroverts like myself probably hate working from home, and there's a certain convenience to it. But if I was given the choice to be able to leave my house and travel even a decent, like I would have a decent commute to go all the way to work or whatever, I would do it, because I find compartmentalizing my workspace and my home life and my recreation space is very important. I think this applies also to like a home gym. I would never have a home gym, and some people, even in this very podcast, probably disagree with that.
Yeah, you're insane.
But
this is a hot take.
I cannot sit in my house and do stuff. I'm here. First of all, hate my house. I don't spend almost any time at home at all, and I sleep here. This is why I live in a basement dungeon, because I was going to say,
the hot take is like you literally live just in a shithole. That's the hot take.
But I don't. Even when I live in a nice place, like
Name one time.
I personally grew up in a house that was quite nice and lavish. Actually, when I lived in
and you enjoyed where you grew up, you really enjoyed the roommates.
No, that's true. Okay, I rented a very nice place in a city because the city's cost was quite low, and so I rented a 1,200 square foot 2-bedroom den. I enjoyed it. I liked it, and I spent the most amount of time there, admittedly. But I had the room for a home gym. I wouldn't want it. I had classes that were flexible. I could either go to class or stay at home. And I still chose to go to class because it put me in the right headspace. it tuned me into, this is work mode, this is home mode. When I'm at home, I like to cook, eat, and sleep, you know? And I just feel like there's a lot of people who miss offices. They miss their cubicle and their desk and their coworkers and things like that due to the pandemic. But I think there's people that, pandemic aside, would bare fist with me over this because they would prefer to never leave their house unless they're choosing to for recreation, I suppose. But that's my hot take. I hate working from home. I would always hate it, and I think it's negative to productivity, whereas people think, oh, it's positive for productivity. I think that's bullshit.
I think, yeah, you have a pretty good point on a lot of that, minus the home gym. I think you're absolutely, completely off base and should be committed to an asylum for that opinion.
Maybe I'm one side of the extreme, but like, I just can't imagine like going to a gym. I just think like I hate people at the gym. I hate, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to the gym to talk to people, but I'm also the person who goes to the gym at like 2 a.m. so it is empty. And it's not the people factor. Even though I'm extroverted, I'm not one of the guy who's like sweating and then going to talk to some girl. I'm like, hey babe, like, what's up? Like, I'm trying to meet people at the gym. Like, I'm not going to the gym for that reason. It's just like I like the big space, but more importantly, like, I like driving there, getting in the headspace to work out, and then leaving. And leaving workout time to workout time at a gym. The physical location is important for me, is what I'm saying.
I feel like, well, I have like so many counterpoints that it's just, that's like a podcast. Like, one is like, haha, extroverts suck a dick. That's the main one. Like, man,
that's a hot take in and of itself.
We've been living in like a freaking extrovert paradise, and then pandemic. Finally, the extroverts get a taste of medicine of what it's like to live in a society where their personality type is discriminated against, and they're just having an actual brain melt.
It's quite a meltdown. I see it in my office. Yeah, I see it in my office a lot, where people are just unhappy.
Just, I mean, tough shit. You guys finally have a taste of your own medicine, having to deal with like staying at home. Like, extroverts love going to the office. Wow, surprising. Introverts don't, and they've had to do it for the last 600,000 years. Like,
to be fair, I think that there should be a choice, though. I don't think that. I don't want you in the office if you don't want to be there, you grouchy piece of shit.
And then, well, that's fine by me. And then the other counterpoint is like, you live, like, even your best place was like not set up to be a like stay-at-home paradise. Like, you don't have you can easily create a home office that is as conducive to workflow as probably way more conducive to workflow than any office space you'd get in. And you can compartmentalize if you have space. Like, you living in a shared place with 4 roommates or whatever is not going to be reflective of.
But that being said, like, my bed isn't next door to my home office, or my bed is next door to my home office. Like, it's things like that, or my kitchen or whatever. Like, I'm distracted because I have the attention span of a fly, so I need to put myself in an environment that doesn't allow easy distraction. Like, I'm the type of person to turn my phone off or play music through my phone and then place it inside a bag or something. And I do that because I want to be successful, and I know that my work ethic is good if I isolate myself and, like, focus in on something. But I could never do that at home.
More creative solutions. Like, there's a million software suites that force your computer. You can schedule time where your computer's locked down to be a typewriter. Like, that's just like a lack of imagination on your part.
You show me a software suite that locks me out of my kitchen, then we're talking.
Well, I think a lot of what you're describing are just like commonly understood problems with productivity, and like your environment definitely influences your productivity. And I think the solution that most of our society has come to is that your home is pretty much for sleeping and eating, and maybe a hobby or two.
Also, I only shit at home, and things like that. Like, my home's for like those things. Like, I'm not going to the office and trying to like. I just feel like, I guess. My take wasn't as in-depth.
But, like, there are absolutely solutions if you have space and ways to maximize your space, such as to achieve, like, an area of your house that you work out in. And when you go into that area of your house, you're in a workout mindset, because you're always in the workout mindset in that area of your house, and you don't go there unless you're
custom lighting or, like...
Yeah, like, there's ways to do it, but, like, your perspective, I think, is pretty much the normal perspective for society's reach, where you go to a dedicated place outside of your house to get the environment, but you can replicate that inside your own home.
I suppose that's fair to also say that maybe I haven't tried hard enough. Like, and to Hubbard's earlier point about how the extroverts are sort of getting like a taste of like the introverts experience, I 100% agree. I'm not one of those extroverts like who's out there still like going to restaurants, even though, you know, like they're open, but you really shouldn't be going to them. Like anyone who can't stay away from a restaurant for 2 months deserves the virus. But like, and it's changed my personality and my activities, but so be it. I can be unhappy for a little bit, you know, like if it saves someone's life, and I do get it. It's just that if the choice arises in the future, I think I'll be the person to continue to use the office, whereas the rest of the people who participate in this podcast are welcome to stay at home and not put pants on and work or whatever you want to do. But I like the tradition and the ritual of leaving my house, and I'm always in.
So I'm gonna back you up, Pudluck. I actually do think that there is some pretty good benefits of working in the office. I'm so torn because I despise commuting with an undying passion. So I would like to go back to the office for certain things, but then I also don't want to be stuck in traffic or stuck on the subway again. And like, so I do see it being important for a lot of people to have that social camaraderie. Trying to build up teams with Microsoft Teams is it's dog shit. It's pure dog shit. It is not a replacement for actual in-person interaction, and I think I would like to see the productivity numbers. It would be really interesting, but I definitely know that from just looking at least like my anecdotal evidence, it's really clear that not being in person damages severely the team bonding.
Absolutely.
It's really hard. It's really hard on a lot of teams that are not used to it. I think obviously people need to, you know, grow up and be able to handle this shit, because listen, we're in a pandemic. It's not.
On the flip side, you also have the productivity increase of like being able to sit in a space and not be bothered 24/7 by annoying idiots asking questions.
Though you don't understand what Microsoft Skype is like. If your company makes you stay on that, people then just pester you all the time.
I think we're getting close to the end of time, so I just want to take a moment. I just think that like in the future, I think it'll be important for those to have choice, because I think someone like Hubbard's, regardless, is going to be doing his work well in the office or at home because he takes his work seriously, as well as the other people.
I think you're clearly useless.
But like someone like myself, I know that my productivity, like if I have a goal, I'll be able to hit it. It will just be harder for me to do it at home. But I think the ultimate, and perhaps this is the easiest hot take to maybe solve, is that like if it's possible for you to do work from home and your performance by the numbers is backed up from it, why are you coming to the office? Like, I don't want you in there and you don't want to be there. Perfect. Like, I can send you an email and be like, hey, I need your help on this, consult on this. And if you're able to give me what I need, but the moment that work from home becomes an issue for a company, it needs to be scrapped. So,
well, I think again, like you said, it's choice, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes for sure. I think there's going to be some companies that just can handle it and some that can't.
But I think that's my hot take, and we can end it right there, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm good. We can move on to the next one. So that's me. Actually, to talk about office life even more, my hot take centers around like Cubicle Nation. So there's that pretty much the running joke, and you see it in media all the time about how office life, Cubicle Nation is this nightmarish scenario. Let's just not worry about but I'm talking about like the general office life, like living and breathing that, what do they call it, like wage slave job, and people always make fun of that and say, oh man, like I could never live that way. They are living it and they want to escape it desperately, and they just think it's the most inhumane, awful thing. You have big subreddits devoted to just bitching about it, like anti-work. Tons of media articles about how you should do everything you can to follow your dreams and get away from this, the soul crushing cubicle. And my take on that is, office life is pretty good. Like, I think people are complaining about shit they should not be complaining about. And the reason for that is, the way that human beings had to work for millennia is just, working in a nice air-conditioned and heated office building, doing, sometimes pretty soul-crushingly boring work, and, sometimes you can have a shitty boss, but comparatively to what human beings had to do before just to survive, and comparatively to what a lot of random people in our today's society have to do as a job, like work some really tough service job, office life is pretty Gucci, and I think there's a lot of bitching and complaining which is not justified. Some of it is, but I think a ton of it is just delusional.
I think a lot of people who work in an office, and they really, really don't want to be there, and they think that like anti-work's super important, and like, oh, I'm making money for some sort of person. They should either try working a physical job because they probably wouldn't be able to do it, or they should try being homeless because that's pretty physical as well. And because like it's true, I'm not even gonna argue against this. I think like if you end up in an office, it sucks, but that's sort of like that's
life sucks. Like it's like most people died out in some shitty fucking like
imagine
trench or like field, right? It's just
really imagine building the pyramids. Just think about that. It's like another day at the quarry.
I'm not an alien, so I can't imagine it. I don't know what it's like being an alien.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that is a hot take for a lot of people because they're like, I want to be an artist, or I want to be a
follow your dreams.
Like, follow my dreams.
Follow my passion. It's like shut up. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like
I think a lot of it is like not the actual office like environment necessarily. It's just like the whole kind of like
consumer culture.
Like the whole just like feel that you get when you're in like an office environment. It like manifests in an office environment like most obviously, but where you just like it's all surface level, shallow bullshit. Like nothing is genuine about the interaction you have, the friendship, or like the quote unquote friendships you make with your colleagues, whatever. It's all just surface level fake bullshit because it's like most of the big cubicle nation stuff is like huge companies that
they are pretty soulless.
Well, they're soulless because they have to be, because they, you have to balance like efficiency against like individualism, and efficiency always wins out, and so you have to have these like super fucking overbearing policies for HR reasons, like all these jokes are banned because if there's one person that can take offense to it in the whole fucking company, it's out. And so you know what I mean, like, so it's all lowest common denominator. Like if it's conceivably possibly offensive to one person in your 40,000 person organization, it's off the table, and that leaves like basically the only most like strict like clamp down surface level bullshit as permissible.
It is.
So
it is very alienating.
And I think like the reason like you actually don't get that to nearly the same extent in like physical labor jobs and like service industry jobs, because the type of person that works there and just I don't know, there's just a certain different culture about it where it's a lot more is permissible in those work environments, and it can actually be like the actual environment is in my personal experience in terms of like if you just separate the actual work out of the environment and you just look at like the actual environment, every single like physical labor and like service industry job has had a much more enjoyable like feel to it than every single one of my like office experiences by like a fucking mile. And so that's what I think people like react to is like there's a just total lack of like humanity in the office.
I definitely agree with that. There's a sterility to office corporate life that is, I do think it drives people kind of nuts. My main point is that a lot of people, they think they're gonna they think it's so bad to the point that, you know, you should do everything you possibly can to escape it, and to be stuck in that scenario is to pretty much die. And I think that's a really large overreaction, because there's a lot of, you know, like, if you really want, then leave. Like, you're free to leave, but you don't do it. So it clearly isn't so bad, because you can go get like one of those, you know, tough manual labor jobs or service jobs, but people don't do it, right? So I think, yes, there definitely could be some pretty big improvements to office life. And I think you actually see that in like smaller companies that haven't got to that large scale where they have to suck all the humanity out. But overall, I think there's a lot of complaining about it, and there's not enough, I think, gratitude for like what it gets right. Just like the fact that it's a job that you can actually find intellectually stimulating for a lot of it.
Or that you don't have to be physically fit, which a lot of people aren't, or that your productivity doesn't rely on your body which is, you know, who's to say that you don't get hurt and then all of a sudden you can't work anymore?
Well, yeah, it's like a lot of people say go into trades, like, you know, you should just be in trades. It's like, have you done trades before? Like, do you know what the hell you're talking about?
Depends, but I would say that's the largest advantage that I can think of for office jobs, is not having the potential to wreck your body. But if you're intelligent and a tradesperson, you should be able to work your way into a position where you're not destroying your body by 40.
Yeah, you do have to pray that you don't destroy. Like, I know a lot of guys.
You can get unlucky for sure.
Smart and destroyed their body within the 10 years that it took them to get into like management, and now they're in management, but they're still fucked. Like, they're not doing the hard work anymore, but like their knee doesn't work and they can't.
Well, there's a non-zero risk of that, no matter what your situation. If you're in the trades, whereas it's pretty much zero risk in an office job.
Yeah.
I think you could just die in an office job because your body's shit anyway.
Yeah.
Well, but again, it's like you're not breaking your knees out.
But no,
I think Stripe is referencing like the additional risk over baseline, which is
absolutely
obviously way higher.
Like, and the risk of like obesity or whatever in an office job is much lower and much less damaging than getting hit by machinery or something.
No, like, I always get shit on labor jobs I work for, like, not putting myself into enough risk, like doing things too slow or like being too careful about things.
Not climbing into the frickin' chains at the timber mill.
Pay me enough to take additional risks.
So
like,
true.
It's like, you didn't even cut off one of your fingers and you've been here 6 months. What are you doing, fuck pussy?
Yeah,
I do feel like people who work in an office really, and who have never worked a manual labor job, should try. And to Hubbard's earlier point about like the camaraderie and like the culture, I think it comes more naturally in a non-office setting. But truth be told, I've worked in industrial jobs where everyone hated me because I don't know. I was just not liked there. I didn't fit it. I don't want to say it because that's the reason why I wasn't liked. Like, I definitely came across as condescending because I was a university student and I was there for summer and they were all like lifers, I want to say. And like, a lot of them are really stupid people. And that was just the facts of it. But a lot of those people are still good people, even though they're dumb. And I feel regretful that I didn't integrate in the culture more. But like, working a manual labor job genuinely has negative health impacts on your mental health as well as your physical health. Like, people are like, oh, get out, get moving, it's good for you. But it's just like, you ever shovel 14 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 months straight? Like, sure, you're physically fit, but it really screws with you.
Builds character, I think you mean.
Yeah,
and then it's the only time I thought about like actually breaking my own leg at work so I could get paid. I was so close to doing it because I was so done, and then I was like, oh, I'm deeply mentally unwell.
Oh yeah, I worked those jobs before, and it's just like, it's rough. It's a rough thing. So I think people complaining about office life, it's like the alternatives can be.
I think that I want to say that I think that was a really good hot take because there are a lot of people who are anti-office, but find the right fit for you. If you hate an office that much, you want to blow your brains out, quit. Like, you don't have to be there. And they don't owe you anything. I don't care that Jeff Bezos is super rich. You're not Jeff Bezos. Get a job.
Well, he is. He's like a lower class billionaire though, so you should feel bad for him.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, like, all his wealth is tied up in one little company called Amazon, and it's like...
Doesn't have any portfolio diversity. He could be bankrupt tomorrow.
Yeah, it's pretty risky. Like, who knows when Amazon's going under?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Elon Musk has cars and spaceships.
Well, Musk is also
And brain links, but it's still, all of those could go under.
And PayPal. I don't know if he still has
Like, you
PayPal.
need at least a
he
couple
sold it.
hundred good stocks to be diversified into.
Exactly. Well, you also ideally want a private company that's not even on the books, not even public, so that nobody even knows. Like,
Also-
it's a real big green.
Elon Musk has hair and Jeff Bezos doesn't, so Jeff Bezos get bullied.
Anything else to add?
I think that's it. I'm done with that. If you guys are wanting to move on,
I think it's about time.
alrighty.
Hubbard's round 2, let's go.
Right. So mine is really sensitive and nice and lovely. Is just basically like all the people that bitch about like never having money and always like being broke and poor, and like by and large those people are not like, they're not actually in a bad spot in terms of like their job or whatever. Most of them are just shit with their money. And like, because I mean, there's certainly some people that have, you know, whatever, they're disabled and they can't literally work and they're in a bad spot, whatever. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the person that, you know, most people listening probably know someone like this, like that makes a median income,
Makes
like
as much money as you. Like,
yeah, like makes like you're probably a coworker or whatever who makes like a decent salary, whatever. It's not, you're not blowing the tits off your career or anything, but you make a decent salary, 15, 20, 30 bucks an hour or something in there, and they're always constantly bitching about being broke. And it's not, it's not because their income is bad and the government needs to bump, you know, make laws to make income, you know, minimum wage 50 bucks an hour, or that everything costs too much and there needs to be legislation, or it's, you're just shit with your money and you don't want to admit it. And I think a good proof of concept of this is like, I often hear those people, they'll be bitching when they're making 15 bucks an hour about how they're broke and they can't save money, and then they're making 30 bucks an hour and they're still bitching. It's like, you survived on 15. Yeah, you didn't have any savings in your paycheck to paycheck. Now you make double and you still have no money saved. You're still paycheck to paycheck. So you couldn't save any of that increase in income. Like you couldn't, you know, like if you're making it on 15 and now you're making it on 30, surely you could have, a couple bucks an hour could have been savings, right? And you could have a cushion. Nope. Every single penny's gone, even though they doubled their income. And I think that's like super common across, like, you know, kind of like the middle bracket, just blaming.
Well, it's definitely commonplace to spend like that in all of North America, to my understanding. It's like the spending structure. Most people don't have $1,000 for a rainy day.
Yeah, and again, like that's the type of person I'm talking about. Who's, it's not that they don't have an income problem, and they don't have a society's fuck problem, or, you know, the system's rigged problem. They have, you know, a spending problem that they haven't addressed, and probably to their grave won't address.
Yeah, I definitely have noticed that with quite a few people within like my sphere. It's always a complaint about how the city's too expensive, or how, you know, life is too expensive and Canada's too expensive and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, I save half my income, and I make the same as you, because we're, you know, like we're all working the same industry and we make roughly the same. So like, what is going on here? Like, it's clearly not, you know, it's clear that you're doing something that I'm not. It's, you know, I think paying a little bit more attention to what you're actually doing and not complaining is the way to go about it. But I think people, like, to do that is just, nobody wants to have to restructure their life and lower their way of life. They can't. It's so antithetical to the way humans think.
Well, it's also like that classic meme that, I don't know, it's an old meme now, but it's like, can someone who's good at budgeting and economics help me with this? And then it's someone's like monthly breakdown, and it's like, you know, like $700 on rent, and then one of the categories is like phone bill $300, and they're like, cut down on phone bill, and then he's like, no. And it's true, like, as I'm 22 years old, and most people I know, this is not an exaggeration, will have a phone, probably a nicotine addiction, rent in an expensive city, car, insurance, all of these things, and then on top of that will go out and drink, order food, don't cook for themselves, and then still say like, oh, I worked so hard at work like this week, like it was such a long week, I'm gonna treat myself, and then go on like a trip on a weekend or something, and then at the end of the month they're like, man, that's such bullshit, get paid, all goes towards bills. It's like, man, some of those bills you could like cancel, like you stop doing that.
Yeah, I was just gonna like I had kind of jotted down some thoughts on like big one, clubbing, like drinking and eating out. Like delivery services now have taken over, and like I've used it a couple times with coupons, and it was like pretty decent. But like it, $50 for a meal for two is just, that's what a delivery service is these days. Like it's just $25 a person. Like that's, yeah, phone and other electronics. Like people will have a phone and a tablet and a laptop and a nice TV and a console and all that stuff. Nice vehicles, like a decent vehicle, even though like, and they travel all the time, that kind of stuff. And it's like, man, like, do you think you have the right to like all of that plus like healthy savings and all that stuff? Like that's a pretty luxurious lifestyle, especially when like this whole podcast skews pretty young. Like you're not even established in your career yet, and you're demanding more than that. Like when you're younger, you kind of just have to, if you want to save some money and like be financially sound, you're gonna have to live like kind of that way.
You have to live frugally, like that's just a responsibility.
Like you're probably gonna make more later in your life. Like you're comparing yourself to your parents and going like, well, I don't have the same luxurious lifestyle my parents do. And it's like your parents have 4 decades or whatever of work behind them, and you have like 2 years. Like no shit. Like
yeah, it's so like, true too.
Why I think another big one that just seems to happen very frequently is people spend money on things to have that they have so many things that they have that they can't actually use all of them to like any significant degree. Like people would be so well benefited by just breaking down how many hours they think they'll actually use things in a practical sense. It's like you don't need a $20,000 boat that you're going to use 16 hours a year.
So like, true.
Well,
you have to do the analysis of like, say, I don't know, you have to do like the cost per hour, like, and compare it to like what your wage is. That's what I do that all the time. Like if I go to the movies, and the movies is like maybe $20, and I'll be there for 2 hours, so it's $10 an hour, and like I don't make anything because I don't have a real career, but like I'm like I can justify going to the movies, spending $20 once in a while for sure. That is pretty reasonable. But then you go, I don't know, this is personal to me, but like you go clubbing, you spend literally like $200 in a night for like 5 hours, so that's $40 an hour, and you don't remember any of it because you're drunk. Like maybe do that really once in a while.
Yeah, and I just don't see how people think it's like you're deserving of more. Like delivery services is a big one. It's like you don't think you should have to cook for yourself ever. Like it's just, I don't know, like of course you're gonna have to pay a huge premium to have food literally driven to your fucking door. Like that's just a no-brainer. Like you don't, that's not a given, that's not a right, that's above and beyond. And it's like you can eat very reasonably if you just buy your own groceries. Like it's not, you can, like a single person can live like at the height of luxury on like $300 or $400 a month on groceries. Like that's like such a high amount.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's like even on minimum wage in say Canada, that like most provinces, that's like less than a week of your work going to like household items and food. It's not that it's not like that.
Also, people always like to cite that they can't cook, but I don't know, as like you can go to a grocery store and buy some things that are pretty easy to cook, even frozen pizzas and stuff, like, that maybe you aren't eating like super luxuriously, but so much cheaper than eating out.
Well, and like you can't cook.
You need that $20 pizza.
You can get like chicken breast, for example. You can literally get like a few dollars worth of spices, make a rub, put it on and some olive oil, put it on the chicken breast, put it in the oven, and it's a fairly decent tasting piece of chicken. With, if you can't put a powder on a piece of chicken, like how are you making money? Like,
it's funny.
Weird you have.
It's funny because I know people who are so scared to cook meat. Like, that's the one thing they won't do. Like, they'll make themselves food at home, but they're like, yeah, what if I fuck up cooking the meat? And it's just like, what do you mean?
You'll survive
it. What do you mean, bro? Just cook it.
Well, you might not survive if you get some horrible disease, but like, thankfully, there's nobody has ever thought about putting cooking tutorials online before, so there's no resources out there to teach you. Like,
you're just soup. You better you gotta burn 35 meals.
Luckily, practice doesn't have any influence on how good you are at cooking. So if you never cook for yourself, then like you'll definitely just be at the same level as if you always cooked for yourself.
Yeah, true. True. Yeah, I see that a lot. Is people like. Yeah, that's a huge claim. Like, oh, I can't cook, or I can't do that. It's like, man, you can go on YouTube for 10 minutes and figure out how to make.
It's like you're going to screw up, and it's frustrating to screw up and burn a meal or something. But it really give it 2 weeks, and you'll actually be able to make some pretty decent meals. Like, you really will. Just give it 2 weeks, and they'll be cheap. You'd be surprised how well you can do it.
Yeah,
I'm not a big fan of it, but.
Quickly to a note of like the delivery service thing too, even like the grocery thing, people splitting the difference and getting groceries delivered to their house. I mean, with the pandemic, it's a little bit more unique. Some people think that it's justifiable, so they don't have to expose themselves. But like Chef's Plate or whatever those things are, like the things that send you groceries for like $200 a week, that it's like all pre-portioned meat and stuff, and they have ingredients. And it's like, I mean, maybe it's better, but it's like, just go to the grocery store, my guys.
And to push back on that just a tiny bit, like you can get delivery from like regular grocery stores for a few dollars if you're in a big city. Like I know,
that's true.
I know someone who was getting Save on Foods. It was like weekly deliveries was like $3 to $6 or something per delivery. It's like, yeah, it's not free and it's adding to your grocery bill, but $25 a month, it's not that big of a deal for the convenience. Like if you
have a car or something.
Yeah, if you don't want to go to the grocery store and you spend $25 a month getting it delivered, you're still way farther off ahead. That's literally one meal a month compared to.
And it could save you on transit or car or whatever your associated costs of going to the grocery store.
Or even just your time, really.
Exactly. So like there are like, again, that's not open to everyone, but like there's lots of those options where you can have like a fair degree of convenience and affordability. Like you don't need to.
You just have to use your brain to find out, and that's where the real issue is.
Yeah, I think that's it. All right, we're getting pretty close to the time here. So, do you guys have anything else? Any last minute wraps?
Nope.
All right. I think Price, you're up.
Yeah. So this one's not like a fully fleshed out idea, but it's something I've been noticing with the unfortunate necessity, or maybe not necessity, but wanting to follow more of what's going on with politics and the world with COVID. And you just see it all the time with probably the biggest example being American politics, because it's both the biggest country and it's under the most scrutiny. And it seems as though media organizations and the general public just very much downplay the effects of conflict of interest on the decision making of people in positions of power, and that there are some checks and balances, but my instinct, without looking into it too deeply, is that there's not nearly enough, and that it's a problem that people don't want to address because it kind of puts the environment a person is in as being more important on their decision making than their character of who they are as a person, which I think is commonly an issue that people address with motivation. I think I basically think conflict of interest is a huge deal in decision making, and it should be more talked about than it is.
I would agree. I would say that a lot of people really do kind of brush it off. It's like it's a conflict of interest. It doesn't have any sort of punch behind it. I think with the general population, it's like, well, an actual conflict of interest, a serious one, is like, it's very serious. If you are, you have the option of doing the right thing to help out your nation, or making, $30 million on some stock trades or something, it's like, that's actually an extreme temptation. And a lot of people like to say, well, if it's a politician, they're obviously going to do the bad thing because they're bad, or something like that, some cliched thing. But I think a lot of people, they don't realize that if you were in that situation, there's a good chance you have not set yourself on a proper moral footing to be able to resist that either. And I think that's where, yeah, like to your point, like it needs to be taken more seriously. And just because you have to assume that people, if they're given that conflict of interest position, they're going to fuck it up. I would say that.
Like, one of the big examples that I can think of that kind of shocked me was the whole Bush administration with Cheney, basically, and how he was on the board of directors for, I believe it was Berkshire Hathaway. And
Halliburton.
Okay, Halliburton. Yeah, I don't know tons of financial stuff, but yeah, their value just skyrocketed because they started getting all these contracts from the U.S. government, the federal government, during the same period of time in which Cheney was the vice president, who had the most power of any vice president ever, and was in the White House and just wasn't on their their board of directors anymore, so it wasn't a conflict of interest. And it's like, yeah, it's probably still a conflict of interest going on there.
Well, and really quickly on the Cheney point, but he received so he was tasked with finding the VP for Bush, and he, I don't know, spent a couple weeks doing it, and then decided that he would just do it. And when he resigned from the board of directors of Halliburton, he received a huge severance pay. And then if you look at I remember there was a podcast that talked about this, but if you look at their investment in giving Cheney a severance, their return was like 1,000% or something on the contracts within the first year. It was something along those lines. It was ridiculous, but I think too, like, there's been a change in conflict of interest, I would imagine, in the States, because I remember, and this is always cited, but Jimmy Carter had to give up his peanut farm when he became president because there was such public pressure to do so. They thought that he would institute like policy that would benefit him.
I don't think that's accurate. I'm
pretty
sure that there was no public pressure for Carter to give up the peanut farm, but he did it as like a
sign of good faith.
Yeah, an act of character, saying, like, I'm just going to go full hog on this and have no ties, even something as like small as a peanut farm, which was not very big or profitable. Like he was just, it was like an extra show of like, I'm all in on this, like, anti, conflict of interest or whatever. I guess I would just, I don't know. America is so weird. Like, they hate their government and they're like all over their government for things. But like, insider trading isn't even banned for American politicians. Like, it's just bizarro land there. Like, there was that one senator who was on some sort of committee who got information about coronavirus.
Oh yeah.
He was like briefed about coronavirus before it was made public, and he bought a bunch of stocks in the medical companies that he knew would pop. And there was also another politician in 2008 who was briefed about the impending financial collapse, who shorted the market, made a huge amount of money. Like, it's just any other country, like, they're, like these those politicians didn't even lose office or anything. Like, that, nothing happened. Like, any other country, in the Western world, that would be like
you're going to jail.
Yeah, like an unmitigated disaster for that politician and that party. Like, I mean, if you look at Canada and the ethics, ethics problems we've had, like, say, with the Trudeau government, like, there was problems, but like, compared to like just blatant insider trading on clear, like private information, like it's just not even in the same ballpark, and nobody even really gives a shit in the US. Like they just don't.
Yeah, and like you think there'd be like journalists or journalism, which is how do they call it? They want to be like the check and balance on the people in power on behalf of like the little guys, and they just like seem to give up on these sort of stories that actually matter.
What's his name? Matt Taibbi talked about it because he said that back in the day, because he comes from a journalism family, and he's one of the heavy hitters in the American political scene or the American journalism scene. And what he said was, back in the day, journalism was actually a lot more blue collar. It was, you are the check and balance against, these fat cat politicians and whatnot, and so you go after them. And he said that slowly over time, like I think starting probably in the 80s, it started to change where a lot more often they actually wanted to be the people having beers with the politicians, and it became more white collar, and they started to integrate themselves with that culture. Like they actually wanted to become buddies, and now that's what you see. It's like an intermarrying of journalism and the political realm. I think it's just a money thing, right? It's like all this huge sums of money flow into the American government, and then once you get that happening, they can just start buying, pretty much like buying and currying favor with the media. And the right-wing media is Trump supporting, and then the left-wing media is whatever Dem is coming up, they just support that.
I guess the other thing I wanted to say is it does seem like I think it was governors or senators or governors or both in New Jersey, I think, that made a bunch of money off of the coronavirus thing, but like being briefed and insider trading. But it is true, like here in Canada, Trudeau's faced some scrutiny over SNC-Lavalin and the WE charity, but I think conflict of interest maybe has become like in the modern era, it's almost like too messy to get into how fucked everything already is, like and it's so easy to insider trade and stuff because all it takes is a computer and I don't know, maybe I'm uninformed on it, but it is messy. And I think the thing about Jimmy Carter too is he was the first post-Nixon president, so he probably wanted to have a clean slate.
Well, that's a good point.
I know what you're saying about it being messy, but I think it's likely, and as we've said, there's been a bunch of cases in the U.S. that seem extremely egregious compared to Canada, and at least like Canada's system catches these acts that are not so egregious, and people see that and say it's bad. And I think like we could go a bit harder on them, but
I definitely would like to see a little bit more stuff with WE and SNC-Lavalin.
Like the American system seems to be built so as not to catch it or have any sort of checks on it,
or outrage when it happens past a couple of days.
Like the insider trading is just straight up legal. Like there's no rule or law against them just doing it. But I do think a big part of it, or maybe not a big part of it, but I do think there is a huge component of all this problem that is more like, now we just know, like information is a lot freer now, and now we just hear about the big scandals more often. Like, and I think an example of that is like police brutality. Whereas, like, I would be absolutely shocked if, say, in the U.S., police brutality and excessive force by cops has increased in the U.S.
To my knowledge, it's been going down steadily since the 70s.
Yeah, like I haven't actually looked at the studies, but all my thinking would be that the police brutality and police corruption and excessive violence, all that stuff by the police has just been dropping year after year for a while. Yet, if you were to look at the media landscape, you would think it's the worst ever. And I think that's just a artifact of smartphones and cameras, and everyone, it's just getting caught on camera way more. And I know it's not the exact same thing, but I feel like that's kind of like the, by and large, like I bet you American politics was probably more corrupt in, you say, the first, for early part of the 1900s than now.
Well, yeah, even you only have to look at J.
No, the main thing I'm thinking about with this is that people don't acknowledge how much of an issue it is. I definitely agree that it probably used to be a bigger issue before. Like, it doesn't matter if it's okay or not. Like, people are not going to like it when you do that to an extent. Like, there'll be some people who don't like it. So if it's going to be found out about, there's probably less incentive to do it than when you know it's totally not going to be discovered by anybody.
Sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, my interpretation, like, my line of thinking that I agree with you on is, like, I think people do attribute much more to, like, the character of the person, right? And the they see it as like a moral choice or whatever, and much less think about their conflicts of interest, right? Like, a politician makes a shitty decision that benefits himself. They go, well, that politician is an asshole and a person of low moral character. It's like, no, that person is just a person by and large, most likely just a kind of an average Joe, and he was just put in a situation where he had conflict of interest, and he obviously, I think what Khan said earlier is, like, most people are going to make that choice to benefit themselves, not the collective. So it is I think
it's a human problem.
Yeah, like, people like to make it sound like it's some sort of individualistic character flaw rather than just heap it on the environment, because then they get to be morally self-righteous, and especially in the era of, like, social media, that I think that's even more attractive, right? You get to go on Twitter and rant about how such and such politician is a complete bag of shit, rather than saying, oh, well, if I was in that same position, I'd probably be just as shitty of a person. It's just maybe we should change the situation.
Yeah, and I actually think that was, like,
that's a good way of summing it up.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what your point was too, Price. Is like, that's what you need to have.
Articulating what I was thinking.
I don't think
brave enough.
What's that?
I'm brave enough to say that I would be a corrupt piece of shit. So.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, I think everybody, except for I don't know anybody personally that, other than a couple people, that I think would put them in a situation where it's like you have to choose between the greater good of, like, your citizenry as an elected official, or make $30 million and you're not going to go to jail for it. You might not even lose your job. It's like, I would say almost every single human being I know, they're probably going to do, it would be very difficult for them to not take that choice. And it's like, I don't know for sure what every single one of them are going to do. There might be a lot more than I thought, but from studies that I've read, people generally, if they can cheat and get away with it, they usually do. Like, in clinical in experimental settings, that's been shown over and over again, where people, if they can get away with a bit of fudgery and they're not going to get penalized for it, or they think that they're not even going to get found out, they start cheating, even if it's just like, all the regular Joes off the street. And so I just don't see anybody being put in a situation like that and faring very well. But again,
that you might lose the next election, but you're not going to lose the $30 million in your bank account.
Exactly. So, it's like, why do you need an election again?
Man, I would take the $30 million so lickety split, dude. This is why we need people who have a gun against your head if you do that. Because, like, I would never work a day again in my life. I'd insider trade and then I'd leave. Like, I wouldn't even try it.
That's exactly, I think that's the point that Price was making, is you gotta put those guardrails up, because people are going to do that, stick those guardrails up, and people are not paying enough attention to the fact that people are like that, and there's just not enough guardrails up in general.
I'm a spiteful enough person that, because I'm not making the $30 million, I'm also pissed off, so I'd put the gun against the guy's head. Like, you didn't tell me about coronavirus 2 months earlier, I'll literally shoot you in an alleyway. But that being said, it is.
I respect your decision. I would have done it as well.
I would also have done it, but I'm still gonna kill you. Like,
yeah.
So that's my summation of that.
Yeah. Well, we're getting real close to the end here for the time. So, is there anything else?
Just sum it up as, like, demand. Like, people need to stop demanding better politicians and demand better politics, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
better institutions in which you install people.
Yeah, because that was the whole point of the founders. The founding
Canadians fathers are, more morally upstanding than Americans. It's just our political system has more
checks and balances.
Checks and balances that keep people in line.
Yeah, that's why our scandals are pretty small compared to the States. All right, Podluck, you want to do your last one?
This is also, I think this is much more lighthearted than the other ones again, so maybe that may provide some comic relief, but I think that, and I can't speak to outside North America, but specifically in North America, I think that there's rampant alcoholism and alcohol consumption problems that people are willing to say aren't a big deal and sweep under the rug. And I think the important thing to say is that I do not think that there are rampant alcoholics. I think that there are people who abuse alcohol who fall above the safe level and below the alcoholic level, and that everyone thinks that's fine. I think that I believe the government of Canada says that it is 5 to 7 drinks for women a week, and I think they lowered it. It's like 7 to 10 drinks for men a week or something. It's quite low, but it averages to about a drink a day is like the maximum. And people are like, oh, yeah, for sure. Everyone drinks too much. I know that for sure. And then they proceed to drink too much and act like it's not a big deal. And with an aging population, we're seeing more and more prevalence of, onset. We're seeing that alcohol may contribute to things like early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, degenerative diseases. It may exacerbate certain genetic disorders, arthritis, things like this. And as our population generally trends older in the North America, we're going to see a bigger issue. But maybe it's just because I'm young, but all of my friends and stuff, and myself until recently, drink way too much. Like, have like 3 or 4 beers and be like, oh yeah, like you're only supposed to drink 1. Isn't that crazy? Well, it is literally crazy that we're not thinking about it a bit more, in my opinion. But
I'm just going to clarify. I just actually Googled it for fun, and the low risk drinking levels in Canada are as follows: 15 drinks per week for a man, with no more than 3 per day, and 10 drinks for a woman with no more than 2 in a day. And then on special occasions, every now and then, it's okay to have 1 extra drink. So presumably 4 drinks for a man and 3 for a woman, and occasionally.
That's actually crazy to me, because I was drinking like 50 beers a week for like 5 years. So like that's like, I don't think I'm the exception at all. I mean, I definitely drank heavily, but like that's among, and maybe as people get a little bit older, they age out a bit, but it's very common among like mums and stuff to be like, oh, wine o'clock after the kids went to bed and stuff, and like drink a bottle of wine. And I don't think a bottle of wine is an exaggeration at all. I think that there are a lot of young mums.
Well, even a half bottle is like, that's a lot.
And yeah, people are like, oh, a bottle of wine, but like a bottle of wine is 750 milliliters, and a glass of wine I think is 5 ounces, and there's 30 milliliters to an ounce, so 150 milliliters.
I think it's about
5 glasses in a bottle.
So 5 glasses in a bottle. So if you crush half a bottle, that's your limit. That's a little bit above your limit. And they're definitely drinking like half a bottle is not out of the realm of possibility at all. Like, I would say people drink that all the time. And I just think that, at least maybe it's just in my head that there's this dissonance, but like I always thought of those, like there's little leaflets at the liquor stores that say like, oh, how much is too much, and like get the facts about safe drinking. And you look at it and it would be like walking past something that's like, oh, like remember that heroin's bad, and you'd be like, heroin is bad, and then proceed to shoot up. Like I know it's not that extreme, but like it's like you look at those and you're like, oh, those are just there because they have to be like a speed limit sign, but it's just like, yeah, I mean, speed limit is maybe a bit like, you could go 10 over, but like don't do literally double the speed limit. Like, stop doing double the speed limit. You're going to kill someone or yourself. And it's just like, oh, I can have 5 drinks a day. I'm the exception. I think that maybe I don't even know if that's a hot take. I don't even know if people think about that, but I just think that maybe just recently in my life I've been thinking more about alcoholism and stuff.
Well, I'm glad you brought some humor and a light kid.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about the humor aspect of this.
Well, yeah, it's,
and some.
Yeah, I guess maybe not humorous, just less economically centered.
I think more. This is by far the darkest.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is darker
because this is like most people personally know people that are fall into these categories.
Yeah, and even I want to make this clear, like myself included, up to like very recently, I've decided to not drink for a while just because I just didn't feel like it was doing anything for me anymore, and like we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I was definitely a social drinker, but like sort of examining it in retrospect now, I'm like, man, like a lot of people are willing to say, be like, oh, like young people, you got to get it out of your system while you're young and stuff like that, but it's just like, I think that there's a lot of people past 19 who are still heavily drinking, and now that they're older, they don't say, oh, got to get out of their system. They're just like, they're the type to have a beer.
Past 19. You can't drink before you're 19.
Yeah, exactly. But like, even in like the 1920s, like after that, it's like, is it expected that you just stop drinking, right? But like, I'd say like 30-year-olds, and I would be interested to get some metrics, but like, I bet people just drink way more alcohol than you should be.
I think the pandemic actually, you'd have to look up the stats, but I have a suspicion that the pandemic jacked up, especially in the beginning, jacked up alcohol consumption rates massively because people are working from home, and it's like, well, it's 4:00. I'll have a beer during work. It's okay.
And I finished all my university finals drunk. Like I was drunk at home. Like I was admittedly like not happy that I had to be in a pandemic doing university online, but that I was just like, you know what? Like I don't care about this. I'm taking a pass in these classes. I'll just drink. But the university I go to led the study for the province I live in. They led the study for the they have a department on substance abuse there, and it was, I would have to look up the stats again, but it was an immediate spike, and alcohol consumption has remained the highest per capita it's ever been right now in my province. So I agree, but maybe it's because it's on my mind, and also I'm stuck in a house, so all I think about is
getting drunk.
So
pretty much just getting drunk.
You are an alcoholic.
Not much of a hot take.
Maybe that hot take has just come around. But I guess my hot take, to be summed up, is I think that drinking's too normalized. And I think that I think
it's fair to say that's a hot take, that drinking's too normalized in society.
That, and the fact that bars are still open and stuff, and that people still need to go to bars and stuff to drink, or drinking at home. People are still drinking at home a lot. And it's just like...
Well, one thing I've heard from... reading articles, because I would never go to bars or don't really associate with people that frequent bars much, but apparently for a lot of people that frequent bars, like that's a big social aspect, and you can't really do the going to a bar without drinking because like people find you really weird if you do that.
Yeah.
So like they're basically systemically stuck in like at least a low level of alcohol consumption, and probably like spiking relatively frequently over safe limits, and it's because of their, well, not because of, but supported by their social life and society as a whole. Like there's not really a place they can get the same experience without alcohol.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think there is kind of like an interesting parallel to like smoking, where like smoking also used to be that, right? Like people used to socialize, smoke break, socialize, that kind of thing. Smoking was kind of like just not seen as a big deal. And like if you compare like how society treats, say, smokers and smoking compared to like drinking, and
you're an actual pariah in about like 75% of the population if you're a smoker.
Yeah, but I think there is a fundamental difference between smoking and drinking, which is kind of at the root. But I would agree, like people have, I would say, a much too permissive attitude towards drinking. Like as long as you're not like. As long as it's like actually not like actively ruining your life, basically.
Yeah, you're not lying about it and
like as long
as really
half lit.
And a really permissive attitude towards encouraging drinking.
Yeah, like it's just like if you're not actually showing up to work like wasted or puking on your getting DUIs 24/7, like people just don't give a shit if you like people won't really bat an eye if you're like, oh yeah, I have like 3-4 beer a night, like
it's just not a problem.
Much, but like whatever.
And like I think that that's what I'm saying from a health standpoint. That is an issue. It's so taxing on your body.
Yeah, it is. There's no way it's good for you.
And nobody really seems to care. It's like it would be like drinking a pack of soda a day. Like a lot of people do that, and it's not good for you. But like, I just like drinking 3-4 beers a day is really bad for you. The research says, and I would have to read and cite more. But like, it's emerging more and more that is even worse than we thought previous. That is bad for you to drink casually all the time.
From personal experience, it's your body just functions in a fundamentally worse fashion when you're drinking that sort of consistent level.
Yes.
It's like if you aren't drinking alcohol all the time, like things just work better in like a hard to describe way until you experience it.
And I used to casually drink for a long time and drink, low levels of alcohol consistently, and then I also used to drink, like spiking, like binge drink and then take a while off. I've done both, and like I definitely feel a lot better. I'm not drinking right now, but there is a safe amount of alcohol to drink, and that safe amount is woefully underestimated.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Is there is a safe amount that you can enjoyably drink, but a lot of people overestimate. They really think that limit is a lot higher than it really is.
It seems to be like the rule of thumb is like whatever I can function on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
if I can hold a job and like whatever, then that's a safe limit of alcohol.
And honestly, I wish that drinking didn't affect you so negatively because I enjoy the taste of beer quite a bit, and other alcohols I enjoy drinking or whatever. But like, people are like, oh yeah, no big deal. Like, like I have a couple beers I have 6 beers a day after work. I still make it to work. I still like provide for my wife and my kids and stuff, and like, or whatever. And I'm just like, man, like maybe just try not drinking. Like,
oh man, also like if you enjoy the taste of beer, like I feel like people just tend to forget non-alcoholic beer exists.
Yeah,
but that stuff is actually generally delicious and has no side effects, and it's like 30 calories. It's almost carbonated water, but it tastes better.
Thinking about getting into it, but I don't need any extra calories in my diet, so I probably won't. I love carbonated water though, and I definitely have replaced my beer habit with just crushing like tea. Like I'm definitely addicted to the habit of drinking something constantly.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So like water, tea, coffee, carbonated beverage, carbonated water. Like I enjoy it a lot. Same with like giving up like all forms of nicotine or anything in people's life where they have that habit to like touching something. I get it, but like I just think, yeah, that was my hot take. I think maybe a little bit. It was definitely not hard.
I definitely agree with it though.
Nice and light, thank you.
Yeah, real light. Hey, everyone's dying from alcoholism slowly, and the world is turning a blind eye to it. But like, super good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Anything else, you guys? Otherwise, we'll wrap her up.
No, I think we can call it.
I think I enjoyed that. That was my first hot take session.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.